Bias from envy, jealousy. Well, envy, jealousy made what, 2 out of the 10 commandments? Those of you who have raised siblings, you know about or tried to run a law firm or investment bank or even a faculty. I've heard Warren say 6 times it's not greed that drives the world but envy. Here again, you go through the psychology survey courses and you go to the index, envy, jealousy, 1,000-page book. It's blank. There's some blind spots in academia, but it's an enormously powerful thing, and it operates to a considerable extent on a subconscious level, and anybody who doesn't understand it is taking on defects he shouldn't have. Bias from chemical dependency. Well, we don't have to talk about that. We've all seen so much of it, but it's interesting how it always causes moral breakdown if there's any need, and it always involves massive denial. So it's just, it aggravates what we talked about earlier in the aviator case, the tendency to distort reality so that it's endurable. Bias from misgambling compulsion. Well, here Skinner made the only explanation you'll find in the standard psychology survey course. He, of course, created a variable reinforcement rate for his pigeons, his mice, and he found that that would pound in the behavior better than any other reinforcement pattern. And he says, aha, I've explained why gambling is such a powerful, addictive force in a civilization. I think that is, to a very considerable extent, true. But being Skinner, he seemed to think that was the only explanation. But the truth of the matter is that the devisers of these modern machines and techniques know a lot of things that Skinner didn't know. For instance, a lottery. Somebody draws a number by lot, it gets lousy play. You get a lottery where people get to pick their number, get big play. Again, it's this consistency and commitment thing. People think that if they've committed to it, it has to be good. And the minute they've picked it themselves, it gets an extra validity. After all, they thought it and they acted on it. And then if you take slot machines, you get bar, lemon. That happens again and again and again. You get all these near misses. Well, that's deprival superreaction syndrome. And boy, do the people who create the machines understand human psychology. And if you got, for the high IQ crowd, they've got poker machines where you make choices. So you can play blackjack, so to speak, with the machine. It's wonderful what we've done with our computers to ruin a civilization. And but anyway, misgambling compulsion is a very, very powerful and important thing. Look at what's happening to our country. Every Indian reservation, and look at the people who are ruined by it with the aid of their stockbrokers and others. And again, if you look in the standard textbook of psychology, you'll find practically nothing on it except maybe one sentence talking about Skinner's rats. That is not an adequate coverage of the subject. Bias from liking distortion, including the tendency to especially like oneself, one's own kind, and one's own idea structures, and the tendency to be especially susceptible to being misled by someone liked. Disliking distortion, bias from that. The reciprocal of liking distortion, and the tendency not to learn appropriately from someone disliked. Well, here again we've got hugely powerful tendencies, and if you look at the wars in part of the Harvard Law School, as we say here, you can see that very brilliant people get into this almost pathological behavior. And these are very, very powerful, basic, subconscious psychological tendencies, or at least partly subconscious. Now let's get back to B.F. Skinner, man with a hammer syndrome revisited. Why is man with the hammer syndrome always present? Well, if you stop to think about it, it's incentive-caused bias. His professional reputation is all tied up with what he knows. He likes himself and he likes his own ideas, and he's expressed them to other people. Consistency and commitment tendency. I mean, you got 4 or 5 of these elementary psychological tendencies combining to create this man with a hammer syndrome. And once you realize that you can't really buy your thinking done, Partly you can, but largely you can't in this world. You have learned a lesson that's very useful in life. George Bernard Shaw said, and had a character say in The Doctor's Dilemma, every profession is a conspiracy against the laity. But he didn't have it quite right, because it isn't so much a conspiracy as it is a subconscious psychological tendency. The guy tells you what is good for him. He doesn't recognize that he's doing anything wrong any more than that doctor did when he was pulling out all those normal gallbladders. And he believes that his own idea structures will cure cancer. And he believes that the demons that he's the guardian against are the biggest demons and the most important ones. And in fact, they may be very small demons compared to the demons that you face. So you're getting your advice in this world from your paid advisor with this huge load of ghastly bias. And woe to you. There are only two ways to handle it. You can hire your advisor and then just apply a windage factor, like I used to do when I was a rifle shooter. I just adjust for so many miles an hour of wind. Or you can learn the basic elements of your advisor's trade. You don't have to learn very much, by the way, because you learn just a little, and then you can make him explain why he's right. And those two tendencies will take part of the warp out of the thinking you've tried to hire done. By and large, it works terribly. I have never seen a management consultant's report in my long life that didn't end with the following paragraph. What this situation really needs is more management consulting. Never once. I always turn to the last page. Of course, Berkshire Hathaway doesn't hire them, so I only do this on sort of a voyeuristic basis. Sometimes I'm in a non-profit where some idiot hires one. "17. Bias from the non-mathematical nature of the human brain in its natural state, as it deals with probabilities employing crude heuristics, and is often misled by mere contrast, a tendency to overweigh conveniently available information, and other psychologically rooted misthinking tendencies on this list, when the brain should be using the simple probability mathematics of Fermat and Pascal, applied to all reasonably obtainable and correctly weighted items of information that are of value in predicting outcomes. The right way to think is the way Zeckhauser plays bridge. It's just that simple. And your brain doesn't naturally know how to think the way Zeckhauser knows how to play bridge. Now, you notice I put in that availability thing, and there I'm mimicking some very eminent psychologists, Kahneman, I hope I pronounced that right, and Tversky, who raised the idea of availability to a whole heuristic of misjudgment. And, they are very substantially right. I mean, ask the Coca-Cola Company, which has raised availability to a secular religion, if availability changes behavior. You will drink a hell of a lot more Coke if it's always available. I mean, availability does change behavior and cognition. Nonetheless, even though I recognize that and applaud Tversky and Kahneman, I don't like it for my personal system, except as part of a greater subsystem, which is you got to think the way Zeckhauser plays the bridge. It isn't just the lack of availability that distorts your judgment. All the things on this list distort judgment. And I want to train myself to kind of mentally run down the list instead of just jumping on availability. So that's why I state it the way I do. In a sense, these psychological tendencies make things unavailable. Because if you quickly jump to one thing, and then because you've jumped to it, the consistency and commitment tendency makes you lock in, boom, that's error number one. Or if something is very vivid, which I'm going to come to next, that will really pound in. And the reason that the thing that really matters is now unavailable, and what's extra vivid wins, is, I mean, the extra vividness creates the unavailability. So I think it's much better to have a whole list of things that cause you to be less like Zeckhauser than it is just to jump on one factor. Here, I think we should discuss John Gutfriend. This is a very interesting human example which will be taught in every decent professional school for at least a full generation. Gutfriend has a trusted employee, and it comes to light, not through confession, but by accident, that the trusted employee has lied like hell to the government and manipulated the accounting system, and it was really equivalent to forgery. And the man immediately says, I've never done it before, I'll never do it again, it was an isolated example. And of course it was obvious that he was trying to help the government as well as himself, because he thought the government had been dumb enough to pass a rule that he'd spoken against. And after all, if a government's not going to pay attention to a bond trader at Solomon, what kind of a government can it be? But at any rate, and this guy has been part of a little clique that has made, well, way over $1 billion for Solomon in the very recent past. And it's a little handful of people. And so there are a lot of psychological forces at work. And you know the guy's wife, and he's right in front of you, and there's human sympathy, and he's sort of asking for your help, which is a form which encourages reciprocation, and there are all these psychological tendencies are working, plus the fact he's part of a group that made a lot of money for you. At any rate, Gutfriend does not cashier the man. And of course, he had done it before, and he did do it again. Well, now you look as though you almost wanted him to do it again. Or God knows what you look like, but it isn't good. And that simple decision destroyed John Gutfriend. And it's so easy to do. Now let's think it through like the bridge player, like Zeckhauser. You find an isolated example of a little old lady in the Seas Candy Company, one of our subsidiaries, getting into the till. And what does she say? I never did it before, I'll never do it again, this is going to ruin my life, please help me. And you know her children, and her friends, and she's been around 30 years, and standing behind the candy counter with swollen ankles, and you're an old lady, it isn't that glorious a life. And you're rich and powerful, and there she is. I never did it before, and I'll never do it again. Well, how likely is it that she never did it before? If you're going to catch 10 embezzlements a year, what are the chances that any one of them, applying what Tversky and Kahneman call baseline information, will be somebody who only did it this once? And the people who have done it before and are going to do it again, what are they all going to say? Well, in the history of the Seas Candy Company, they always say, I never did it before, and I'm never going to do it again. And we cashier them. It would be evil not to, because terrible behavior spreads. Remember, what was it, Serpico? I mean, you let that stuff, you got social proof, you got incentive caused bias, you got a whole lot of psychological factors that will cause the evil behavior to spread. And pretty soon the whole damn, your place is rotten, the civilization is rotten. It's not the right way to behave. And I will admit that I have, when I knew the wife and children, I have paid severance pay when I fire somebody for taking a mistress on an extended foreign trip. It's not the adultery I mind, it's the embezzlement. But there, I wouldn't do it where Gutfriend did it, where they've been cheating somebody else on my behalf. There I think you have to cashier. But if they're just stealing from you and you get rid of them, I don't think you need the last ounce of vengeance. In fact, I don't think you need any vengeance. I don't think vengeance is much good.